In the later years of the PS1, we began to see a flood of more budget entry style titles. They gave options for players to buy games at more affordable budgets, as not everybody could afford the latest and greatest games on the market, in fairness. Now, many of these games do vary in quality, but among those games there are some hidden gems here that definitely are worth a look, and are better than expected in most regards. While there are other games that I have covered in previous videos on the channel, where the majority of these type of games are usually rehashes of the same game over and over, just with a few subtle tweaks, maybe a few different tracks or different selection of cars, but essentially they're all the same game because they use the same visual graphics and game engines to create them, and there's really no difference in terms of their visual aesthetics. And what we have here in many regards with some of the portions of the game is no different, which goes by the name Speed Machines, that was released in 2002 on the PlayStation. And it's an interesting mix of different genre types, as it does focus on racing. It gives you 3 distinctive categories to race in, so anything from the likes of go-karts to superbikes and even Formula 1 style cars, where you can race across a variety of different tracks. Now, with most of these budget games, they are playable and some of them are quite enjoyable. If anything, the gameplay and visuals in these type of entries are definitely a lot better than you would expect. Even with the superbike portions, they're definitely among some of the best that could be seen on the PlayStation. The problem with it is, like I said, is there's so many games. If you've seen the gameplay on this here, there's so many games that come out pretty much from the same developers that reuse the same assets over and over and over again. Games like of the Superbike series, XS Moto, even the Castrol Honda Superbike series, all utilise the exact same assets. Essentially they're the same game, just with a few subtle tweaks here and there. So it's really hard to tell the difference. So the Superbike portion of this game is exactly the same pretty much, bar maybe a few different tracks and vice versa. But then you have the go-karts and even the Formula 1 game modes, and they are somewhat different. The Formula 1 is quite impressive, right? The handling can be a little bit on the sluggish side, but it's a lot better than you would expect. In many cases it's even better than some of the Formula 1 games that did release on the PlayStation. Even the go-kart games, and there wouldn't be too many go-kart experiences on the PlayStation itself, but it's definitely among some of the better ones. So even though this may be a budget entry game, it has a lot of good value and qualities going for it, which to many you'd never even think that was even possible, but it's there, plain to be seen. The only downside, like I said, is what I find is the reuse of the same game engine, the same visuals, the same tracks, game assets, with only certain visual cosmetic tweaks here and there, but other than that there really is no difference to other games that have been released on the console, which is a pity in the later stages of it, because it became a sea of clones and similar titles that all looked and played and felt the same, just rebranded under different names, but technically they were all the same games, and this one really is no different. But what this one does do is that it packages 3 games together, so if you didn't have access to those other games, you just buy this one and you have them all pretty much there. Even with that, the one thing that is missing from each of these games is the addition of some sort of championship mode. If you had some sort of progression system where you could go through like a career based option, gaining points by winning races in order to progress up a ladder and even unlock different features, tracks or cars that you could use, you can't do that in here. Essentially it's just a simplified game where you just pick a race, you pick a track and you just race until you win, and that's pretty much it. Now you do have different difficulties, so the harder the difficulty, obviously it does become more difficult to play, and in some cases can be downright impossible sometimes. But just the lack of a few additional gameplay modes is definitely for me what lets it down in all regards to it. Like, it's not to say that it's a bad game, it's actually not. It isn't. It's just there could have been a lot more variety, even though, well, there is variety there, but it just could have been more, if you know what I mean, in terms of additional modes. But if you do like these type of games, you've 3 different packages there in one bundle that you can choose from. If you're into superbikes, you can give that a try. There's Formula 1, there's go-karts, so there really is enough there for everybody, in fairness. But if you have played any of the other games like I mentioned, like XS Moto, the Sport Superbike series, you will be very familiar with certain portions of this game, and if you have played them or own them, you probably don't even need to play this, in fairness. Like, even when we think of it, there is another collection of games that was released on the PlayStation. It was the Family Games Compendium that housed 3 discs worth of different types of games, anything from casino and puzzle games. But the 3rd disc of that collection also housed a very similar outlay that we see here, that had go-karts, it had Formula 1 and it had superbikes. So in reality it's no different. Like I said, if you've got one collection, this essentially is the same one. It's just repackaged and rebranded brand it under a completely different name. But I suppose that's what sells back then, because most of us gamers in that generation would have been completely oblivious, especially in the later stages of the PlayStation. So in many regards, I know I probably hate saying this, but the developers were quite clever. They knew how to pull the wool over our eyes with regards to these games, because most of us didn't even know one from the other really. Because think about it, growing up, not all of us had money or were working in jobs. You had to rely on pocket money to go and buy these games. You weren't just going to go and buy something that looked similar to what you already had. And even if you did, you didn't really know about it until you played it, but by then it was too late. You weren't going to be able to go and change it really all that much. But unfortunately, that was the reality of what was happening in the later years of the PlayStation, which is a shame. But at the same time, it's not to say that they're entirely bad games, they're not. They just could have had more variety and they just could have been a little bit better. But they're still playable, they're still enjoyable. You'll get out of it what you really put into it at the end of the day, but there is enough variety there for everybody, in fairness to them. But regardless, I would love to know your thoughts of this, if you have played it or if you've even owned it, or any of the other games that I mentioned on this list, because there's a lot of them out there that look very similar to this. So be sure to share it down in the comments below. And if you would like to see more content around other games like this, or even other clones of this pretty much, that have been released on the PlayStation, there will be a link in the description and even on screen here to a playlist that will give you access to more of those games, so that you can see the comparisons between them and see how similar they are. And as always, keep those gaming memories alive.